Special meeting. Call the roll, please, City Clerk.
Good evening, Commissioner Castillo.
Here.
Vice Mayor Good.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Commissioner Seipel.
I'm here.
Mayor Ordus.
Here.
City Manager Dodge.
Here.
Assistant City Attorney Horowitz.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Nick.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Dodge, you're on.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a special meeting of the Commission as directed at the last City Commission meeting, whereby the City Commission requested that the item on debris management be sent back to the review panel and do further review. And the Commission established this meeting this evening to continue the discussion on the item. And as you're aware, the city's evaluation committee did meet on the June 11th, which was Monday. All of the evaluators were provided with a video of the June 6th meeting prior to the evaluation meeting so they could take the City Commission's comments into consideration. They did meet and their recommendation remains the same. Based on all of the discussion, you have two opportunities for this evening to discuss. One of them is the motion to approve the findings and recommendations of the evaluation committee and to award AD 1803 disaster and debris management services to D&J Enterprises, Inc. as the primary contractor, Cerise Environmental, Inc. as the secondary contractor, and Bergeron Emergency Services, Inc. as a tertiary contractor, and to direct the city manager to negotiate contracts for service. The second option that we're presenting to the Commission, if they wish to consider it, is a motion to reject all proposals for AD 18-3 disaster and debris management services and to authorize the administration to bifurcate and restructure the solicitation and re-advertise the bifurcated solicitations.
Okay, we have a member of the audience who wants to speak. Christopher Starr, D&J Enterprises, Inc. We need you to come up there and just identify yourself. Hit the speak button, please, and red mic, the mic will come on. There you go.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for allowing me to come and address this commission. My name is Christopher Starr. I'm the Vice President of D&J Enterprises, Incorporated. I was here a couple of weeks ago when we met with your evaluation committee. We did a presentation for them, and I had the honor to speak to them, and I wanted to come and speak with you as well to basically give you my good faith and my assurance that if you select our firm, that we will not default in this contract. D&J Enterprises has not defaulted in any other contracts, even during the time between Harvey and Irma, the two storms last year. We were able to service all of our clients, and we were able to service all of our clients within the ramifications that they needed. We also did not request any price increases. We acknowledged our prices, our unit prices on our contracts, and we fulfilled our obligations. And that's what all I wanted to come is just reassure you that if you do select our firm, that we will fulfill our obligations. We will make all of the resources that are needed and necessary in your time of need. You can count on our firm. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, Commissioners, what is your pleasure?
Yeah.
Commissioner Castillo, you want to talk?
Yes.
Push your button.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I had further conversation with staff who have told me, both the administration and city attorney, have told me some things that make me more comfortable with the original motion. First is that there will be a provision in the contract that says that the firms, in the order that they're listed in the library, will have to have their assets here in Pembroke Pines 48 hours before the commencement of the event. At the point that that's projected. Mr. Dodge, that's correct?
That would be a requirement of any contract
Okay.
with any chosen vendor.
So we will have 48 hours, and they will either be here or they won't be here, and then we can move down the list. This was not information that I had understood quite that way when we originally looked at this item. And it changes my view of it, because the issue that we had during Irma was folks stiffing us and not showing up at all. And time was running out after the storm had hit. Here we have a very different scenario. Our whole conversation about companies not being prepared to service us happened after the event, not before the event. So if we have an indication before the event, even 48 hours before the event, that we know who's on the ground and who's going to do what they have to do for us, that gives me a great deal much more comfort going into a storm situation. And because I have that comfort, I can then approach the next issue, which is a thorny one, which is any potential problem with FEMA rules. And as we know, and understandably, they have no sense of humor at FEMA. And they say very clearly that there can't be a local preference. But I feel at this point now that we have the safeguards that we need. And if those safeguards are going to be in place, then I don't have a problem supporting the recommendation that staff are making, because it will give us enough time to go through the list, first, second, or third, and get to where we need in terms of being prepared before the storm hits so that we can be working immediately after it leaves us. So I'm prepared to support option A.
Thank you. City Attorney,
Yes, Mayor.
option B, does that give us the legality that we need from FEMA if we chose that as well?
It would, Mayor. We've had some limited discussion about both options, both the last meeting on Wednesday as well as the conversations we've had individually with most of you this afternoon. Both options are legally supportable. Any amended bid specs that would be embraced by option B would include all required FEMA provisions, federal guidelines. Neither of those options would include a local vendor preference, as Commissioner Castillo alluded to, which is precluded and prohibited under federal law. But either option would be legally compliant with the FEMA requirements.
Thank you. And so I would respectfully disagree with my colleague. I would certainly want to go to B, because I think then we could have it in place and know how many trucks we have ready to go. And you've heard me in my dissertation saying time is of the essence. So, Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Technology is not getting up to my speed here, so. So hearing what what my colleagues have referenced regarding having contracts that are not exclusive, first and foremost, the fact that there's a local issue, and I don't know that the focus was really on a local issue as much as the focus was on being able to have assets available to the city in order to provide that service. The other element, too, is, the way that FEMA does reimbursements, and it's one of the things I'm trying to do is get the public assistance guide up here, but there are alternatives on how you can get reimbursements, and one of another important component to this, and I don't even know if it gets factored into the review process, which was regarding how we get payback. So there's several different ways of doing it in the absence of maybe submitting a debris management plan that gets approved by FEMA, and you get an additional percentage point of recovery for your costs and things like that. But they do have other ways of doing this, and one of them was about how quickly you're able to perform these services. So if you're able to perform these services within 30 days, you're able to collect up to 85% of your cost. If you go to 60 days, anything from 30 to 60 days, it's 80%, and so forth and so on. And there's a table in the Public Assistance Guide, which really is a very valuable tool when you consider the fact of how quickly, for two reasons. One, quickly we want to get things off the ground because we want to get everybody back to work and back to recovered mode. But also there's a financial incentive actually to get everything done quickly. So certainly having assets immediately available now becomes a very important component to the city in two respects. So when we look at the contracts, what's before us in A in particular is that there is a recommendation to adopt or to accept only the top three. And I will tell you, in my experiences, I've done these many times before, and I've never limited the number of contractors if they were qualified. And personally, and the reason why I've done this in other locations is for that reason, is that, you know, if you have three firms and they can all provide, great, but if they can't, you're in a situation where you have limited resources. But if you add another three or another four more to go to, you can actually just keep going down the list until you actually get all of your services taken care of. And so we got 7 or 8 people on this list that are qualified, 7 or 8 firms. You go to the top firm and say, okay, give me all your resources you have. When you're depleted, we go to the second one, to the third one, to the fourth one. And so the way I look at this is not necessarily A or B. I actually look at this in the sense of I would make a recommendation to accept all the firms that are qualified and put them all on the library of services, and that way we have a larger pool of resources should it be necessary. And I think it's the asset access that we're looking for. And I think that will resolve that problem.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any other commissioner would like to speak?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Commissioner Seifel.
One question, and I listened very carefully to what you all have said. And should our number one, Mr. Dodge, should our number one choice, when we call on them, whoever that would be, not be able to provide what we need? First off, how would it be decided upon how much we need and what we need? And secondly, should the first firm not be able to provide that to us within that 48 hours? They have 48 hours to do it. So they can't do it. We wait the 48 hours. We go to the second firm. They can't do it. Do we wait then another 48 hours, and do we keep waiting for it? How does that play out time-wise on that?
Mr. Mayor, during Hurricane Irma, we had that situation where the selected vendor did not show up. So we went to the secondary vendor who came forward. However, we would expect that within that 48-hour period, if the first one didn't show up, we'd automatically go to our second vendor.
And I would assume then that second, if you had to go second, third, fourth, whatever, that they haven't already committed somewhere else.
Well, they are on the list. They have been awarded the contract to be the secondary vendor. So I assume they would make themselves available. That did occur in Irma, but there were other issues that we had to step forward, and again, we keep saying Irma was an unusual event for the state. It doesn't mean there can't be another unusual event for the state, but it could become a problem. And but you heard the gentleman speaking for D&J Enterprises, and he's made that commitment. I don't know what else you can say, but except what the company is saying.
But is that a correct thought, that if we would have to go to a second firm, that would then start the clock again, that they have now 48 hours to be notified?
Well, I think that's something we would have to consider, I guess, in our negotiations. in dealing with a contract, because the contract that is negotiated with the first selected vendor, D&J, I defer to the attorney, I believe it would have to be the identical contract for the second and the third contract.
I understand that, but when does the clock start for them? When does the clock start for second or third?
We would expect it to start immediately. Now, I don't know how, I really don't know where the second Service Environmental is from. Are they how far they are from our community, so I can't tell you, but
Okay, but that shouldn't, that's not the question I'm asking, and that shouldn't be a difference if what we're saying. That should be.
If I may just try to follow up on the city manager's response.
Horowitz?
Mayor, thank you. The city presumably would know within 48 hours of a storm whether the first option was going to perform.
Right.
Because they would not have staged at the agreed-upon location. As soon as the city were to know that the first option was non-performing, we would have the ability to move on to option 2, call them and request an immediate mobilization. We would not have to reset a clock for an additional 48 hours at that point, and we could build some language into the contract to embrace that concept.
Okay, but but it actually would, okay, thank you.
I have an additional question.
Hold on a second. Mr. Thomas, did you want to say something? Then we'll go to Commissioner Castillo.
Brian Thomas, I'm Vice President, Bergeron Emergency Services. To the point the Vice Mayor made about the library, I just want to first and foremost say that we do support, from our company, being a library in a library of contractors. We've worked in that scenario before, and it seems to work very well. And as far as the activation of the contractors, depending on the magnitude of the event, the characteristics of the event, you can put each one of the contractors, issue a notice to proceed, and have those contractors on standby. You don't owe us anything until we go to work for you, until you assign us areas to go to work for you. So in that regard, you can put us all on standby, and we have a duty to perform. It's who shows up, the fastest with the mostest to go to work for you. One thing I would like to just bring up as a clarification, I know there was some discussion at the last meeting regarding the, and I'm not an attorney by any sense, assistant city attorney. However, there was conversation that the rankings could not be changed by the commission due to the Broward County Board of Ethics. In conference with our council, our understanding is that as long as the Board of Ethics does not allow the commission to serve on the evaluation committee. However, there can be changes made by the commission as far as not the ranking, but if you decided to go to a library of contractors, that you could do that. And that's my understanding from our council, that not necessarily, that as long as they were not serving on the evaluation committee, that they could make determinations regarding the rankings or how the contractors were selected.
Thank you, sir. All right, Commissioner Castillo again.
Yeah, this is.
Mayor,
Yes, Commissioner Schwartz.
to the Attorney Horowitz, were you able to get the answer to the inquiry I made earlier today?
Mr. Horowitz?
May I respond? Which one, Commissioner? The answer is yes, but which one in particular?
September 30th.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
I didn't hear that.
The Commissioner asked me a question earlier regarding our current contract with Bergeron, which expires in 2020. The reason that we're going through this exercise is that the federal guidelines under FEMA have changed, and we're required to go through a procurement in order to comply with the new guidelines. The current contract that's in place is a valid and compliant contract up through September 30th, at which time we need to have a new contract in place that meets the current federal requirements. Our current contract with Bergeron, as I said, extends through 2020. In the event that a contract were awarded tonight to one or some number of vendors, or the manager was directed to negotiate, the answer is that would not have a direct impact on the existing contract. However, we would ultimately need to terminate that contract as non-compliant because it wouldn't be able to be implemented or be eligible for reimbursement as of the 30th of September. There is a termination for convenience provision in the agreement. We looked at it this afternoon. So it would be somewhat of a housekeeping manner as it relates to that existing contract once the commission made a decision as to how to proceed with this procurement.
Okay, Commissioner Schwartz, that answer it?
So City Attorney Horowitz, basically, what we had discussed earlier today, you've confirmed. So would it be, would the commission have the opportunity to put the, I guess the start of this new contract with this RFP, to set that with a start date of September 30th? This way we have, we are currently performing we have a contract with Bergeron. It would only expose the city to another 6 or 8 weeks of potential storm possibilities, and then give the administration the opportunity at some future point to bifurcate. Is that an option that we could have?
The only hesitation that I would have with that process is the unpredictability of a storm and the unknown as to how FEMA will view reimbursement in the context of a work effort that begins prior to September 30th, but is not completed by that time and extends beyond the date where we'd be operating under a contract that was no longer legally compliant.
Is there a date that you would be comfortable with?
Not given the unpredictability of a storm or the magnitude of a storm or the duration that it would take to clean up after a storm. It took the city some number of months to clean up post-Irma. So if there was a storm that occurred next week, we theoretically could be catching the remnants of it by the end of the summer into September.
So if a storm were to hit before September 30th, and then a contract would have to expire, would have to be terminated due to the our inability to get reimbursed, would a future contractor be obligated to continue that cleanup process?
Our recommendation and frankly our preference to put the city in the best position to be eligible for FEMA reimbursement would be to have a contract in place compliant with the federal guidelines as they stand today.
And city manager, if we were to bifurcate this, what guarantees do we have that all 4 provisions of this potential RFP process would give us certainty, a guarantee that we would have a vendor in place within a relatively short period of time, considering that we're already in hurricane season?
Mr. Manager?
Well, there are no guarantees. However, if it were to go out for a rebid, the earliest it could come back would be the beginning of August meeting.
And city manager, would it be your direction to keep the same evaluators on the evaluation committee that are currently serving on this RFP process, or would you be selecting additional or making any changes?
I haven't made that decision at this point or contemplated that.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Castillo.
Yes, thank you. City Attorney, the Vice Mayor made a suggestion that we sort of adopt A in the form of going all the way down. I believe there were 10 vendors, right? Was it 10? Or 12?
There were 11, I believe.
11. Do we have the authority to just go down all to the 11 in the order that the committee ranked them?
City Attorney.
The only issue or comment that I would have regards to the process suggested by the Vice Mayor is that the committee was not operating in a pre-qualification mode. They were evaluating firms with a recommendation or an intention to recommend 3 for the commission to consider. It was not none of the firms were deemed non-responsive, so they all submitted responsive bids. That doesn't necessarily mean all the firms are pre-qualified in the sense that they have the ability and capability to perform the services.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Dodge.
If that were the case, I'm looking at it from an organizational method. This contract was all encompassing. It not only included collection, it included the management of the sites, it included tree removal, the leaners, the hangers, and the stump removals. It also included the chipping of debris from the temporary and transporting of that to another site. The most important one, of course, always is the first push, so that when the storm is here, you need to clear the streets. In Irma, we, because of the non-performing initial vendor, we found a contractor that did the first push, and we had all our streets cleaned within a couple of days. I think the idea of using, as you describe it, as a library of vendors, if you did it, I think you could only do it in the area of collection, because you need to have someone who is going to be set up to manage those drop-off, the temporary and the final one. You also need to have someone who's going to be responsible for chipping and grinding of the vegetation. You also have C&D, which is a transport. So I don't think you could have 11 people in there trying to manage everything. So it would have to be somewhat split up.
You know, I mean, let me just clarify the question, because I'm not quite getting, I mean, I can understand where, from the operational perspective, by the time we get to that, which means that the third firm didn't perform, we're in MASH mode, and we're picking and choosing whoever it is that we can get our hands on pretty much to do whatever pieces they're available to do at that potentially very difficult point in time.
Whoever's left over.
That's right. Now, my question would be, it's all right, I don't mind my
No,
colleague
we're
helping.
going to talk individually.
Okay, all right.
Because when you cross-talk, we get confused.
Okay, so my question is, from a legal perspective, okay? In terms of moving along the lines of A, which you have told me is legally the most defensible thing that we can do here today. You told me that.
Correct, and I would tell you that again.
Yes, because I don't want to take a risk with FEMA. I don't. I think that's not a good idea. My question now is, do we run afoul of anything by accepting Vice Mayor's suggestion that we just accept them all in the order that staff have ranked them?
Yeah,
If I could ask a point of clarification?
Yeah.
My understanding of the vice mayor's suggestion is that you utilize the pool of these, and that they would all have, I guess, equal standing. The only...
No, that's not what I heard.
Okay, well,
What I heard the vice mayor say was, we had 11 or 12 firms, I forget, I'm not even sure if he mentioned it, but somebody said 11, let's assume it was 11. I'm seeing a nod that there were 11. And they were indeed ranked 1 through 11, correct? Mm-hmm. So they're ranked in order. So my question is, can we accept the whole entire ranking?
there's, please?
Vice Mayor, go ahead.
So to clarify, absolutely correct, Commissioner Castillo. It's in the ranked order, where you go to the number 1 ranked firm and you procure the services that you need from them. If they are not able to fulfill the full set of services that you need at that point, you go to the number 2 ranked firm to find out if you pull in their resources and they give you all they got, and if they run out and you still need more, you go to the 3rd ranked firm, and you just go until you deplete it to the final firm. So it's staying in the ranked order, and that doesn't run afoul.
If I may, Mayor?
Go ahead.
To the city attorney, if that would be the process, the first ranked firm that was selected, I really don't know what their rate structure was. I guess what you're asking is that if they're not able to perform, you would dismiss them and go to the next one?
Correct.
Yeah, they'd be default.
And if I may.
Okay, and if that's the case, if they have started, well, first of all, if they've started these processes, then they're moving forward. The problem we had with Irma is that the resources weren't there. So the second provider, who is the second on the list, Mr. Bergeron's firm was there, but the availability of resources were not there. So the city had to take upon itself and go out and find other haulers to at least bring the debris to the site. That's why I was explaining that that process works in the collection, but the city actually had to take over the operation of the temporary site. We also had to hire an independent person to do the chipping and the grinding and the transferring of those chips to the final site of determination. We also, as I indicated in the beginning, had to find someone to do the first push. So it's not easily separated. If you're going to know right in the beginning if the initial person who is selected or company can perform. If they do not have adequate equipment or resources to do it, then my understanding is that what you mean by going to the next one on the list to see if they can provide the equipment? Because it's not just the trucks, it's a whole process that we're involved in.
Vice Mayor.
I understand, Mr. City Manager, and so the answer to your question is that each one of these contracts have categories of services, and you can go to each of the categories independently and provide the contracted service. When FEMA did their pilot program, they did this following the Wilma event, and a lot of it, and of course now Irma, made and elevated the awareness that resources are thin. And so part of what they did through the pilot project was they said, listen, you all need to have multiple contractors and provide multiple services in order to be able to gain access to the assets and or services that you need in order to provide the recovery to your community. So the way, when you talk, it sounds, my takeaway from your conversation is like, if you go to the first contractor, they get the contract, and if they can't fulfill all the services, then you're going to go to the second contract for the full menu of services, and that's not the way that I'm familiar with it. It's all by category. So if you have, for instance, an issue with regards to managing a TMDS, right, temporary debris management site, is that what you're speaking of?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and so there's probably only a handful of those 11 vendors that probably actually can do that kind of service. So you would go to the top ranked TMDS site management person, and if they couldn't provide that service, then you would go to the second, you would go to the third. Put that aside, then you go to the hauling piece of it, and then you would go, you would get all your trucks that you need in order to do all the hauling, and then once you got all the trucks that you need, you would put that aside, and then you would go to your leaner stumps and hangers. Of course, that doesn't come till later, but the point is, though, is you go by category, and then you can, and you use the number one contract within that category and say, this is what I need. When we get into this event, the very first thing you have is you have an assessment. You do an assessment. Probably your monitors are telling you, hey, this is how much you got out there. This is what you need. And they already know right off the top of the bat how much asset you need in order to get something done and what period of time. And again, I point back to the public assistance guide and the alternative reimbursement methods that, timing is of criticality here. So the reality is that they will tell you what you need. You can immediately go simultaneously to to the contractors and say, okay, I need, for instance, 100 trucks. Number one, well, I only got 10. Great, give me 10. Number two, how many can you give me? 10. Okay, give me 10. You see what I'm saying?
Commissioner, Vice Mayor,
Yes.
Mayor, if I may. I agree with you. I'm on the same page.
Okay.
That was the reason why we presented option 4, because what option 4 does exactly, option B, because that's exactly what that would do. It bifurcate it so that you could have bidding on collection, you could have bidding on the temporary site management, you could have a bid on the grinding, you could have a bid on the first push. Okay, but whoever, the award of the contract that was from the selection committee, which was J&D, they basically indicated they can do all these services. This only becomes a problem if they fail to show up, and then we would go to the next process like we had to do in Irma.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Point of order. Go ahead.
I didn't interrupt before because I didn't want to violate your request that we not speak over one another. I have not gotten the answer to my question, and I want to go back to the question that I asked before, because under A, the last sentence of it says, and to direct the city manager to negotiate contracts for services, which gives the administration the ability to negotiate as they need to. Nor is it an absolute requirement. It's simply a right that the city has to hold somebody in default if they don't fully perform. There's no obligation to us. The city manager, at a time when he is managing an emergency, may choose to do what he feels is in the best interest of the city. And if he wants to choose to accept partial services from a vendor and go to somebody else for the balance or whatever it is, those are decisions that are within his power as the emergency manager at that time. We don't need to get involved in that. My question is very simple. Do we or do we not have the legal authority to authorize the entire list of proposers in the order of ranking that the committee put them in? So that we wouldn't be limited to 3. We could accept the entire 11 in the order that they were ranked.
Mr. Dodge?
We're not aware of any federal restriction or state restriction on the number of vendors that a city can contract with.
Well, I want to tell you that I very much like that proposal because it seems to me it gives us the most flexibility. It gives the manager the ability to deal with all of these other concerns, which I think are very well stated in a way that can find its way into contract language. Default is our privilege in the event that a certain thing is done. It's not a requirement that we have. So I don't really feel that that is that's an issue. And you know, and the risk of that is on the firm. If they don't provide all the things that they've decided to provide, they said they were going to provide in their proposal, they run the risk of being defaulted. They run that risk. That's their risk. But that's not our obligation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I very much like what the Vice Mayor said because I think that it keeps us within the scope of A, which is the legally recommended approach in order to avoid difficulty with FEMA, which is a major concern that I have. Had I known last week that this 48-hour provision was included in the contract, I would not have objected. I would have moved to accept. So I like what the Vice Mayor said, and if it becomes a motion, I'll second it.
Okay. Mr. Stinson?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the Commission, staff, Mr. Manager. David Stinson, Eastern Waste Systems. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here before you again today. Just a couple of thoughts. Number one, I did want to emphasize again that, you know, back before this RFP went to the streets, we were here listening to what the commission had to say back when we were discussing hurricane debris as part of a solid waste issue. And it was said, we want to think outside the box. And so when we approached this RFP in a very short, limited amount of time, that's what we intended to do, is to think outside the box. So again, when we submitted our proposal, we wanted to make sure that you understood the commitments to and the thinking outside the box approach that we took, which is committing the trucks in terms of, you know, whether it's a local vendor versus a qualified vendor, or, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a local vendor in terms of ability when the trucks are 25 miles away. And so what we hoped to avoid, or to at least provide a solution, is that for the collection aspect of this, the two items, I believe it's 20 and 21 of the hundreds of items that were listed in this RFP, is that we would give the most competitive and we would guarantee the trucks and give you the best proposal for those two line items, as we saw that we could best help the city in their efforts to perform. And I understand that, you know, it was mentioned earlier that Irma was a once-in-a-lifetime event, but if you go back to 2005 and beyond, going back to Wilma, there's always more. It seems like in hurricane season, or at least the events that most impact us, there's always multiple ones. And while you look at the #1 ranked firm, I'm sure that their intention is to subcontract a lot of the assets out. A lot of these larger firms, they put their asset lists on their websites, listing the assets. Well, we have the assets. We submitted titles to trucks on our asset list that we put into this RFP, and we committed to a minimum of those. And at the same time, we're listening to you and your desires and what you needed and what we could provide as part of this RFP. So again, in terms of the selection process and getting the job done, I know we're going to get the job done. I know we're going to be here. Our employees know the city, so that minimizes the risks for safety and doing property damage and things of that nature. And then also in terms of response time, 48 hours, we don't need 48 hours. We're already here. We just need you to tell us to come.
Thank you. City Attorney,
Yes, Mayor.
I thought when I asked you about B, you said that was FEMA, could be FEMA approved if we went to specific contractors and asked them, do you have trucks for collection, do you have whatever, and you're a contractor? That would be, did you say that was FEMA approved as well?
Both options A and B would be drafted to legally
You're not
comply
right
with.
when you said, that he said that that was not right.
No, that's not what I said.
Yes, you did.
No.
Yes, you did.
Excuse me.
Okay.
That is not what I said.
Okay, repeat what you said.
I'll repeat what I said.
Good.
What I said was that the city attorney told me that A is his preference over B. Is that not correct?
That is also correct.
Thank you.
Well, I guess the rest of us must have misunderstood.
Well, no,
Okay,
I don't know how that's possible.
Well.
I made it very clear. It's
Okay.
A over
All
B.
right. I
Is the-
read
is
it.
the
Anyway,
legal preference.
anyway, here's my point. That during Irma, we had a major problem. We had to wait. We had to wait. It is my goal as the mayor, and I know it is the goal of this commission, that won't happen again. We can't wait. That's why I can't understand why we don't go to this B and have contractors and tell them immediately, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that, you have the trucks for this, you have the trucks for that, and immediately upon a storm, we launch. That's the way I think this ought to be done, organized and ready. Not wait 48 hours, not do this, not do that. So that's why I think we ought to either choose B or a combination of, but rather than instead of going all the way down all the contracts, just say, to me, that's organization. I mean, that's my point. All right, further discussion. Vice Mayor?
So I understand you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for allowing me to speak. So in the 48 hours, I don't know what that means. I think that's a 48-hour pre-positioning comment, meaning 48 hours prior to the storm they have to be here. But pre-positioning to me still doesn't mean anything other than maybe what the city manager made reference to as the first push, because it's there's never enough vehicles available to do all the debris removal that's required in any of these events. And as I stated before, I again want to bring it back. I'm sitting here looking right now at the public assistance guidance. It's called accelerated debris removal, and they specifically state here that in a time frame of debris removal, when from 1 to 30 days, get 85% of your cost back. That's 10% more. You can go and use every single one of those contractors from number 1 through number 11 and put them in all different places in this city, and in 30 days have your assets picked up and get the most money back. So for me, I still think that this library of services is actually allowing this city and the city manager the flexibility to maximize two issues. One, the recovery time to our residents, and the second issue is maximize the cost recovery to the city. And if we give him the tools, basically access to all the assets necessary to make that happen, I think that's really helpful. And so if there's no more discussion, I'd like to make a motion.
Mayor,
Okay, hold on.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cyple.
thank you. But I think some of what Vice Mayor just said was to the point that I was making also. Let's not look at it from a city point of view. Let's look at it from a vendor's point of view. If they're rated 2, 3, 4, 5, down to 11, guys, they're not going to sit around and wait for us to call them. They're going to put their assets out somewhere because those trucks are going to be sitting there doing nothing and making no money for them. And they are in business, they're entitled to make money, and they're entitled to do that. So what I'm saying to you all is, I understand what you're saying, Vice Mayor, about these pre-qualified, this library, you know, I get all that. But the practical point of it is, you need a contract that very clearly lays out the language of what we expect to happen in our city, how long we expect it to happen, when we expect assets to be here in our city doing what they need to be doing. Our residents should not have to go through again what they went through this last time. We need to learn from that. The other part of it is, and I've asked this, I think every time we've had conversation about this contract, and Vice Mayor, you brought it up again, and there are a lot of reasons why we want everything done quick and fast. First and foremost is health and safety issues. That goes beyond anything. The second part of it is the financial end of it. There are reasons why you want things picked up sooner rather than later because of your reimbursement. And so what I'm hearing on these two different options that we're discussing now, A and B, from city attorney, either one of them is an acceptable option according to what FEMA regulations are. As far as B being a difference, I guess it just means that we have to do a little, if that's the one that gets chosen, that we have to take some additional steps to go forward where A's kind of, I guess, in place. So I don't see that, and I understand, city attorney, that either one of them, correct, that either one of them are legally acceptable options, FEMA legally accepted options for our city, either option A or option B. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, again, thinking of it from a practical standpoint, from a business, from a vendor standpoint, they're not going to wait. They're not going to wait. They're going to pick up what they can pick up, and they're going to get a contract with where they can get a contract. They're not going to wait to see if we're going to drill down and ask them to come and help pick up. We need to have a contract with a contractor, with a vendor, and I believe that there are a lot of different moving parts to this whole pickup and getting rid of debris part of it. I really am favoring B for that reason. I think that makes a lot more sense. First off, location of where are you gonna take all this stuff? Where else, you know, there are a lot of things that haven't been really discussed here. I like the comfort of having a contract currently in place that gets us through September 30th, but we do understand that we have to be ready immediately at that point to go forward with something. You know what, I think that we were very, very fortunate in our city that we had a good number of seeming to be on paper reputable vendors that came in and provided and responded to the RFP. I just think that I'm not totally in agreement with how the RFP was actually structured, and I wish it had been maybe structured slightly different, which I think I would have liked the way B is set up to be how it would have been structured from the get-go, so that when vendors do come in and respond to the RFP, they know exactly what they are responding to. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Commissioner Seipel, let me share with you what my thoughts were in regards to the comment about vendors, from a vendor perspective. The goal is to allow the #1 ranked vendor to have all the work. They have the first right of refusal. But the moment they say, I'm sorry, I'm tapped out, that's the point when you go to the second. So they're gonna get all the work that they possibly are able to get at that particular time. Now, let's say you move on and they're still trying to get more people in. I mean, this is a daily activity. I mean, it's so dynamic. The needs are like incredible. You know, you think you picked everything up, and then you go back down the street, and everybody cleaned their yards out, and next thing it looked like worse than the first time you went around.
I know, I follow
Yeah.
trucks around.
So,
also, I know.
I mean, so there's a lot of this stuff that goes on, but the way that I'm presenting is that the top ranked vendor, you know, gets us all the work that they could possibly get from us. They get the first right of refusal. That's the point behind it. So I'd like to just go ahead and make a motion if I could, if we're ready. I'd just like to motion the fact that we accept.
Hold on 1 second, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Would you mind?
No, I will.
Mr. Thomas raised his hand. Would you mind if you speak, or are you ready to make a motion?
I'll let him speak.
Okay, gotcha.
Mr. Vice Mayor, I greatly appreciate it. And then one other recommendation from a vendor standpoint I'd like to make is the path that I believe that the Vice Mayor's going down with that library of contracts, which I initially spoke that we agreed to, is to keep it. D&J has qualified themselves, Series has qualified themselves, Bergeron has qualified themselves, even if you went to 4 or 5 contractors as a library. If you go and give all 11 contractors, then you're inviting that one contractor that didn't show up for you the first time back to the table again to have the opportunity to serve you again, which I think is a disservice to the vendors as well as the city, because that vendor actually got ranked higher than some of the firms that are here, and they didn't even show up for work by one of the evaluators. So the library of contractors, that concept has worked. We've worked under that scenario before, but I would strongly suggest, and at the pleasure of the commission, that it at least be limited to 3, 4, maybe 5 qualified contractors that have answered the mail for all of those services. Because as Commissioner Castillo said, if you get to the 3rd contractor, you're in a quagmire anyway. You got a bigger problem that you ever thought you had in the first place. So, Mr. Vice Mayor, I appreciate you hearing my comments.
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead. Hold on 1 second. Mr. Dodge?
Yes, I was going to mention, Mayor, because I understood the Vice Mayor's comment, that we do eliminate the company that's ranked number 7 for that exact purpose. So there would be a remaining 10. My feeling is that in this particular case, probably the only weak point in this whole thing would be not having enough equipment to pick up the debris. So I would agree with the Vice Mayor that we do the 10. There were 11 on the list. I would highly recommend you eliminate vendor number 7, and that was based on commission comments before that anybody who ever reneges on a bid, they should not be permitted to bid again, but this did occur. So if it's the Vice Mayor's pleasure to do all 10, then we go with all 10.
Point of information, Commissioner Castillo.
Yeah, I was going to ask that very question. So I thought we had consensus, or there was a vote, or I can't remember at this point. But the company that stiffed us last time, I don't understand why they were even allowed to bid. Didn't we debar them?
No, you didn't. We
Okay,
didn't
now
at the time. But
So then my question would be.
Made a motion for that.
But it was after the
So
fact.
I guess my question is, forgive me for not responding to you, Commissioner. The answer is yes. So the question is, why, does this now cause us a problem? Is FEMA now going to say you didn't follow your own procurement code? You know, there's such a thing as loving a thing too much. And I don't know what the answer to this is. I had asked the question before, what happened to this company? And, you know, they get to come back in here. And so does this complicate the matter? That we can eliminate a company here on the dais? Are we allowed to do that? Is that going to be a FEMA problem?
May I respond, Mayor?
Go ahead.
The debarment process is codified in our procurement code. It stands independent of the FEMA rules and regulations. If the commission wanted to exclude a vendor or go through the debarment process, which requires a public hearing, requires notice to the vendor, there's a certain due process component to the debarment system. That is an option that we can pursue, certainly with that one vendor, but there'd be nothing that would stop the city or the commission from excluding that vendor.
For the purposes of proceeding tonight with the cleanest possible motion that the vice mayor is likely to make, do you recommend that we go with the 11 ranked, and then you guys go and proceed with what we had hoped you were going to do anyway? Or do you want us to exclude this firm? Which of the two would you prefer legally?
We don't have a legal objection to excluding the one firm for the reasons stated, if the commission wanted to proceed with 10.
Okay.
Okay, Vice Mayor, before I entertain you for a motion, I think one more, okay. Further discussion? No, Vice Mayor?
So then I'd like to make a motion that we accept all 10 firms, let me say this again, that we accept the 10 firms where we are excluding the 7th ranked firm.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Castillo. Discussion.
If I may just offer for the record, that would be in the order of ranking by the evaluation committee.
In the order of ranking by the
Thank
evaluation
you.
committee. Thank you.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none. Call a roll, please, City Clerk.
Vice Mayor Good,
Yes?
Commissioner Castillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Yes.
Commissioner Seipel.
I didn't hear that.
You said yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Seipel? No. Mayor Ordus?
No. Vote passes 3-2, I believe.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you all.
We have another
One more
item, Mayor.
Mayor.
Go ahead. City Manager?
It's the second item. We decided to put it on this agenda rather than the 20th, and this is,
Want me to read it into the record, Mayor?
Go ahead.
Item number 2 is a motion to approve the findings and recommendation of the Evaluation Committee and to award AD 18-04 disaster debris monitoring services and financial recovery assistance to Tetra Tech as the primary contractor, Rostan Solutions LLC as a secondary contractor, and Thompson Consulting Services as a tertiary contractor, and to direct city manager to negotiate contracts for services.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Castillo. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Seipel. Go ahead. Hold on a second. Go ahead, Commissioner Castillo.
City Attorney, should I not make an amendment to this item in order to have it conform with the first?
no, it's
It's a separate standalone item, Commissioner.
Standalone
It's for a different service. It's related. It's the monitoring service as opposed to the hauling.
Okay.
All right, further discussion. Hearing none, all in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, we done?
Yes.
Go ahead. Vice Mayor?
May I just bring something up?
You can.
Independent, and it's sort of related to the hurricane stuff as well, and I don't know if any of you all received a letter from Mayor Beanfer regarding shelters.
Yes.
Yes.
And so I don't know what it is that we are intending to do, because they're asking for us to provide resources to man the shelters, staff and things like that. So I mean, is that?
We do provide staff to the shelters in our area. We send police and
I
we send
answered you
fire.
in an email. Mayor, if I may?
Go ahead.
Yes, we provide both, at the request of those, we provide police and we also provide rescue services for those shelters.
But he's also asking for volunteers.
Well, that's, it's volunteers, but we also provide our staff.
Mayor, I think,
Yes.
I think the presentation, or the asking that he was doing at the league was about volunteers to not just be in shelters that are within our city, but for them to be logged in at the county level so that they could be sent, other places where there was a need for, and they were asking for specific ones for special needs shelters, animal shelters, and that kind of stuff, the shelters that allowed animals, folks that would be there that would have that desire to do that, was I think a lot what he was asking for.
Can we do a CCTV advertisement, encouraging people to volunteer and giving them the number where they can call if they're
That's a
wish?
good idea.
Yes, we can.
Can we do that? That would be great.
Yes, we can.
Place some of them closer to where they lived, closer to their own homes, if they weren't close to clients and.
Anything else?
Happy Father's
Okay,
Day.
we're adjourned. See you at 7.
Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day.